Hey guys, and welcome back to another edition of the Dead Simple Podcast with your boy Jamie, Hey Daddy, whatever you want to call me. And today I've got on Xenaero. And this is going to kick off a little bit of a special, if you will, for my series. It's going to be focused around the World DooM League, and Xenaero is going to boot us off. Now, Xenaero, he's an interesting case. He has been, for the vast majority of his time, a prominent player in the DooM multiplayer competitive scene, both as a duelist, but primarily as a CTF player. And Xenaero has been very temperamental is the way that most people would describe him. But honestly, he's a really good dude. And on top of all of that, he's really evolved over the last couple of years and crafted his hobby of being a broadcaster. In addition to a broadcaster, he's done a lot of concept art. He's done a lot of production art for Otimex, for the WDL, for the Multiplayer DooM Federation, for all of these various leagues and organizations that are responsible for DooM. And today, we talk about a lot of things. We talk about the history of ourselves. We were on a common team once. We talk about the history of the IDL and the history of Z-Damon. We talk about the direction of the game and the direction of the community today. And we go into a lot of different little things. We go into some of his personal battles with things that hold him back as a broadcaster, and he really does have a really telling story about that. So I'm not going to talk too much longer. I'm just going to shut up and let you guys listen. Hope you enjoy it. All right, and here I am with Xenaero, and I actually have you on now after unfortunately not having you on a couple of scheduled occasions, graduation celebrations leading into food comas notwithstanding. Here we are. So happy to have you on, man. What do you got to say for yourself?
Happy to be here. Better late than never.
Did I hear sarcasm behind that?
Oh no, no. Did you?
I don't know, maybe a little bit of passive aggressiveness. No.
No, schedules are tough to line up sometimes. We all know this from
Yeah.
from trying to organize players from around the world in little Doom League.
No, that's true. Yeah. So what I'm referring to, in case anybody isn't getting this reference, is I actually, I don't reveal the dates that I actually record these on, but Zen and I were scheduled to do this on two separate occasions. And the first time, I think what I just said, I was like, dude, I worked like a long ass shift and I just can't do it. And the second time, I graduated last year, but I actually had the opportunity to walk this year, and I couldn't walk last year because of the pandemic. And I celebrated afterwards. I didn't even have anything to drink. I just had like two big ass tacos, and man, I just got home. Dude, I got home at like 8. It's not like I went, it's not like I got home at like midnight. I got home at like 8. And I don't know what happened, man. Like the next thing I knew, I woke up, it was like 7 the next morning. I was like, oh shit. But here we
Hell
are,
yeah, taco fever.
dude. It was fucking nuts. Yo, what's your favorite kind of taco?
My favorite kind of taco. I mean, can anyone actually have a favorite kind of taco?
Fuck
I'm
yeah,
not a
dude.
taco enthusiast, but if I were to pick a favorite kind of taco, let's see. I do love steak tacos.
It's fair.
I don't like ground beef as much as I did like steak on a taco. I mean, toppings can be like whatever you feel like, but I gotta have black olives.
Black. All right, so that's more like a Mexicali sort of thing.
Yeah, I suppose so.
But yeah, dude, it's all about the carnitas. Those are pretty delicious. I love them, man. I get them, or like barbacoa is pretty good. But barbacoa has to be right. Like you can't. There's like no substitute for good barbacoa. And in my experience, like when I've gone to places like Chipotle, for example, it's just no. You got to go somewhere where I feel like they just took the meat off of the face of the cow. That's the only way I'm gonna be satisfied. I went to a spot in Chicago when I met Jay Kist, actually, and it was before I met Jay Kist. I was there doing a conference for my honors thesis in undergraduate, and afterwards, one of the girls that we presented with that came with us, she was from Chicago, and she took us to a little Mexican joint. I don't know where. It's kind of like a hole in the wall. I mean, it was a beautiful little place, but just you wouldn't expect it where it was located, and they didn't speak any English, and it was fucking fantastic. And that's like the best barbacoa taco I've ever had in my life. It was like a street taco style with like little street taco shells, and then I had a deep dish pizza with Jacobs afterwards. But I was in a hotel with a gym, 24-hour access. I ran on the treadmill for like an hour and a half after that, and probably should have thrown up.
Got burn all the calories you were intaking. Yeah, deep dish pizza and some high quality hole in the wall tacos.
Dude,
I mean, the hole in the wall places are fantastic. If you're
right?
ever in South Florida, those are the places you get sandwiches from.
Oh, dude, for sure.
It's not even close. And I mean, it probably is similar for a lot of local regions too. Ask around, try to find out where the little shops are. Don't go to Chipotle. Don't go to a big national chain. That stuff is all like freeze dried and low quality type stuff because they got to make a profit.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, I mean, sometimes that shit's good too. Like there's like this social contract that we have with fast food restaurants where we accept the fact that what we're eating isn't what they're telling us what it is, but we're paying like $6 for it, so we don't complain. We just kind of silently accept it. Like I know when I eat chicken nuggets at McDonald's, that shit is not chicken. Like that is maybe like 20% chicken. What the rest of it is, no clue. Don't want to know. Don't tell me. It's good. I don't care. I like it. Sweet and sour and chicken nuggets, whatever.
Yeah, you
That's
just have
it.
to temper your expectations really with some stuff. I mean, there are definitely different types of quality, like Chipotle's, like, I would probably say mid tier tacos, but
Yeah, yeah, and it's the same thing though. Like you know what you're getting. They
yeah,
use better. They're basically fast food that uses better ingredients.
yeah, I'd agree.
Like that's all they are, and that's fine. But I'm with you, dude. Like the hole in the walls. That's where I'm going to go. Like if I'm especially if it's any sort of imported food, any foreign style food that's not typical here. And I don't even mean something like Chinese food that's been Americanized, because and I didn't know this until I was told by somebody to actually go and have real Chinese cuisine. It's nothing like what they serve us here, what we think of as like Chinese food, right? And it uses a lot of the same stuff, but it's not so Americanized with huge portions and fried everything. Like it's
Yeah, it's not all
it's
deep fried.
yeah, like it's fucking fantastic. But I want to go somewhere if like I'm going there, like I don't want a single person to speak my language when I go into this place. Like I don't give a fuck if we have to find a translator. Like that's how I know this food is good. There's a spot that we went to, my wife and I went to for our anniversary. We celebrated it. Um, or no, it was my birthday, maybe. I don't fuck it, but we've gone there on our anniversary before. But it's called the Beirut, and it's a Lebanese place. And recently, their waiters they've always had English speaking waiters. But they're bilingual. I'm assuming Lebanese speak what is it? Do they have their own language, or is it just a form of Arabic? I'm not sure, but
I know very little about Lebanon.
yeah. But when you look in that kitchen and you look at the managerial staff, not a single one of them speaks English. That's what I fucking want, dude, because that food is amazing. Like, and it's like it's kind of in this shitty, not so well kept building on the outside. Now on the inside, it's fantastic, but well, there's some things I'd change. The carpet's dirty, but oh
Well,
man,
yeah, I mean, nowadays you have a translator app on your phone, so even if they give you a menu with no pictures, you can like point the phone at it and get a rough translation, so you kind of know what you're looking at.
yeah, that's true. Although I think we're a long ways away from translator apps taking over the job of a translator, but I,
Oh
I
no, of course not.
but yeah, I would do. I don't give a fuck. Like, well, I'll find a way to make it work. That's what obviously David, Prime, and then Collision. They went to
Yeah.
Japan a couple. Yeah, at this point, I think it'd be a couple years. They went and with another one of my friends. You don't know him, but they all went to Japan, and that's literally what they said we did. Is like we don't speak Japanese, and a lot of them don't speak English. We just point at the fucking picture on the menu and they give it to us.
Like I want that.
Yeah, that's the fucking dream, dude. That's the fucking dream. But all right, so we kind of didn't go on topic, but there's not really a topic. I do want to talk about Doom stuff though.
Okay.
So obviously, your name is, well, one of many names that you've had. I'll never forget the DD133. I don't even know what DD133 stood for. What did DD133 stand for?
It didn't stand for anything at the time when I came up with it, but it was not the first name I ever had. At first, when I joined see Damon way back in late 2000s, or late 2000 rather, not 2000s, my name was Psylocke, and it was based on the X-Men character because I was
Okay.
big into comic books as a kid, and I loved the X-Men. But the name changed into DD133 at some point. Because I had forgotten the password to the original account, and so I didn't know what to come up with. So I just slammed my fingers on the keyboard, pretty much, more or less. I don't even think I had a rhyme or reason to it. I was just like, oh, it's whatever. It's crazy. I was 10 at the time. I have no idea. My brain wasn't functioning properly. But that ended up being the name that I stuck with and started playing a lot more online. Not initially at first, because around that period, I still had satellite internet. I didn't even have dial up at that point.
Ooh, what year would have this been?
That would have been a period between, God, I want to say the first couple of years I was online. I got I got Doom 95 for my birthday in 2000, and at that point we had satellite internet, and then I found Doom Connector not too long after that. Before that, I was on old websites, and some old heads may recognize the God, what was it called? Epidermis Emporium. I was on that a lot. I was on the Doom Legacy website that Jive ran. Uh, Doom Legacy was my port of choice at the time, and I was learning about command lines. I was on I was on the New Doom forums before I was on Doom World, so I was often like the tangent, like fringes of the single player Doom community as it stood then. And then I found Doom Connector. So then I started to hang around on there. But what I learned about satellite internet at the time, it didn't work so well for a lot of games.
No, this shit was terrible. I mean, I don't even think like this is satellite internet in the early 2000s, late 90s. Like this is not like Elon Musk internet like we're thinking of now, right? Like
No, it was a satellite dish on the top of your house, and the upload was, I don't know what, I think it was 4 kilobytes per
yeah,
second.
dude, you
So
had like 1,000 ping if you were lucky.
your download was pretty good for the time, but the ping was actually 4 digits for the most part. And
Yeah.
and because I had played Doom Legacy, I could not join a server. It wasn't even really a server. It was flat out peer to peer. So when someone like me joined, the game went from 35 frames per second to about negative 40. It was the definition
There's
of a
no way.
slideshow. Yeah,
Yeah,
it
no
was
way.
absolutely ridiculous. But that was my first exposure to online, and I saw all the usernames in the left hand panel. I was like, there's a whole bunch of people that play this game online.
Yeah, dude. And like it's different because the infrastructure then wasn't the same as it is now either. So quality of connection was just probably not great all around. So even then that tells you we didn't know either though. Like at the time we thought this was fucking great. Like This is
Oh
awesome.
yeah. I mean, a lot of us were pretty young. I mean, I was younger than most of the older players in the community now. So I mean, I was getting on at the ripe old age of 10, getting on the Doom connectors. Not the not the smartest decision looking back, but um I mean, at that up to that point, I was playing single player and had monster respawn on, like had all these crazy like levels that were from the 90s. Like I was just doing my thing, and then when I wandered into Doom Connector, it was quite a different experience.
Were you mapping back then?
I I made like one map. I remember my first map. It replaced E3M6. It consisted of a square in the middle that was about 14 miles wide and had three triangular sectors connected to it, and it was loaded to the teeth with cacodemons. Like it was my version of a slaughter map for me to just play repeatedly over and over again with like infinite ammo and whatever, because that's how I enjoyed Doom then. It was just mayhem.
Yeah, you tipped my cat off. You mentioned cacodemons.
Oh my god, cats love them.
Yeah, dude. Cacodemons are cool though. I think
They
they're
they
funny.
scared me. They were very scary to me as a kid when I got the registered edition of Doom. I did play shareware as a kid on my dad's computer, and they weren't in episode 1. When I got the full version and loaded into episode 2 and found my first one, I'm pretty sure I shut off the game and didn't
Don't even want to touch it.
didn't play anymore. I had a similar reaction with the cyber demon. So that mentality kind of, that's where I was in single player. And then, you know, I did never put the game down.
Yeah. See, so like I never really touched any online Doom until like the mid 2000s, like 2003, 2004. And so a lot of us at that time were already kind of young as it was, right? So by then, oh, let's see. Try to think when you and I would have first crossed paths.
2003, 2004, I definitely had dial up by then. I ended up getting a dial up line put into my room towards the end of 2001. I remember that very vividly. I was so excited, and I started playing more online. I was absolutely hooked. Anything I was playing single player was completely cast aside. I was using Doom Connector as a launcher to get into other servers. I did play CS Doom for a brief bit, but by that point, um, Z Damon had come on the scene, and that's where I started to run into a lot more people. I ran into people from the Mapper Clan Orb, OFOD, FCOD, RFA. Some of those acronyms are for people who have no idea what those are. Those are like really old Doom clans,
Yeah.
and they had a lot of colorful individuals, but for the most part, everyone seemed pretty chill. And and meanwhile, I was I was a preteen and very intolerable.
Yeah. I mean, we were all I don't think that when I look back on it, I think all of us in one way or another, whether we were teenagers, preteens, even young adults, and in some cases it was the adults, not the young adults, but the adults that had probably the biggest red flags looking back on it. But I I don't even like I don't even I can't say I look back at that point in time anymore with resentment towards anybody because I'm just like, well, we were all young and shitheads anyway. So what
There were
somebody said or did, but yeah, well, the point I was going to make is there were some people that to this day I'm just like, nope, absolute trash. Don't want anything to do with you. Not that they're even around anymore, but even in the event that they were, I'd be like, I'm done with that.
well, it's kind of how a lot of communities and circles and player bases and fandoms and whatever term you want to use, you will have those types of people around. Now, I kind of want to throw a lot of the older people in I want to say OFOD for the most part, but like most of the older people in Doom Connector, like Mr. Rocket and crew, were they were usually pretty tolerant. of all these newer people showing up. Like, I mean, everyone in our current generation was like young as hell back then, and probably very annoying to them. Uh, they did, they liked us interacting with their little circle of the internet. It was pretty cool.
Not the case for a lot of other Doom communities, but alas, I've been over that about a million times. I mean, I I don't know. It's different because we all probably met one way or another through Z Damon, even though our initial paths were different. But I do think that as much as I kind of dog Z Damon on my podcast, or at least I've probably had the tendency to, I do think there was definitely a point, especially in that time frame from the early 2000s to the late 2000s, that if it weren't for them, I'm not sure Doom would even be kind of what it is today with online community as big as it was. I really feel like Z Damon pushed the community to grow. The problem was is they just kind of botched it when they did.
Well, I want to touch on that too, because at the time there were very few choices available
Yeah,
for
it's true.
multiplayer available at the time. And probably the most forward thinking of them was CS Doom, which, I don't know when people stopped really playing that. But Nightfang had come from CS Doom to Z Damon before it even had the name Z Damon, I'm pretty sure. I know a little bit about the history of Z Damon, but I do know that CS Doom, which if people listening don't know, stood for Client Server Doom.
Right.
It was the first iteration of having a client and server process for people to join dedicated servers, to my knowledge. And then Z Damon took up that mantle. And from that point on, they had a forum, they had a forum system and an account system even by the time I got around to it. And people were joining regular servers. They had a habit of joining these they had their own home servers and they would join them and people would show up, and there were miniature communities forming inside these servers as people were dueling or playing deathmatch. You started to recognize names, you talked to more people, and that's how Doom multiplayer really took off. The interaction between a larger group of players, which Doom Legacy could not support being peer-to-peer based. So up to that point, my experience had been that peer-to-peer basis, and I had never seen anything like Z Damon until I started playing it. So to jump in a server and play against other people, of course, I had at the time, 160 ping. I was playing on dial-up, but I played a lot of bot games too, and that's how I ended up getting interested in deathmatch. I played a lot. I even made a pack of 100 bots with names of people I've run into online. I have no idea. That's like lost to the sands of time for sure. But that's what I typically played on and trained my aim for the most part, because at the time I played with the arrow keys and stuff. And when I was playing duels, at one point, an old face of Unidoom, Toke, had joined, and we were playing Judas 23 and a very vertical map, which is extremely unforgiving to people who are playing with arrows. And he was like, "Why are you turning so slow? Are you playing with the keyboard only?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, hold on." And he pretty much showed me how to play, quote unquote, like a normal person. And from that point on, it was game on. I was in dual servers like all the time.
Dude, it's like bringing back memories. Because I remember, like you, I started off with just doing the keyboard. And this would have been maybe 2003, 2004. I didn't really know. Because when I played in the 90s, when I played Doom in the 90s, Duke Nukem, um, Redneck Rampage, I'm sure there's other Unreal Tournament, Quake.
Oh yeah,
Keyboard only.
Sure.
Like keyboard only. It never occurred to me that that's what you did because my dad had a computer. He had two computers actually, but my dad at that point was just becoming a fan of building computers. Like he was learning how to do it. So, he would piece together these kind of rigged computers and they'd work and, they get the job done for the stuff that I wanted to do for gaming and stuff. But in terms of like just efficient performance, probably not so great. And yeah, so my experience in the 90s with any game was any PC game is keyboard only. So I remember playing some free for all, and I remember getting shafted one time by a guy, and it was a free for all where I was somehow up and everybody left, and I had like 48, 45, I don't some high amount of frags left, and a guy joined in, and clearly an alias at the time. He came in and he beat me from 0 to 48. He got to 50 before I did. And I turned the game off at that point, and I just but there's something that happened. Like it was something that was like, fuck, I got to go back and learn how to do that. And I started playing free for all, and this guy named A Dog and Laps were two of the players that I just kind of started talking to in passing, and we'd see them in the mag HQs and some of the other co-op servers, and we talked more and more. And A Dog was a bit older than I was, and he sent me a mouse. He's like, no, you can't play with a ball mouse. You need to get a laser mouse, dude. I guess his family owned and he lived up in Milwaukee, and his family owned a whatchamacallit, a mechanic shop, a mechanic shop. And I guess he just had a plethora of laser mice up there, and he sent one to me in the mail. Kind of odd that happened looking back. I mean, if my kid told me, my 14, 15-year-old kid told me, yeah, some guy in his mid 20s in Wisconsin is sending me something in the mail. I've never met him. Is that okay?
Hell yeah.
I'd have problems with that. I'd be like,
see, were you playing on a trackball or like the mouse with the ball at the bottom, like an actual ball mouse?
I had an actual ball mouse, but I wasn't even using the mouse and keyboard. Like the mouse was just there to be a mouse. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
And I started playing on the ball mouse when he was showing me the difference between playing with a keyboard and mouse as opposed to just a keyboard. And even with a ball mouse and keyboard, I could see like, yeah, you're fucking right. Like there's a night and day.
Yeah, but it's a shocking difference.
Yeah, just the raw precision and everything. And yeah, it's like it's funny. Most of the people that I came up with are gone, and they didn't really ever amount to much. But those are people that you don't forget either. Like the people who kind of first showed you the ropes, and makes me wonder how they're doing. Laps was a guy who was back and forth. He came in the community, but A Dog more or less just kind of faded away, and I lost contact with him. And I think the last time I probably talked to him was maybe 2005, 2006. Fuck, like I doubt the guy even thinks about Doom anymore. But that's just the power of like the internet and gaming and in the community that you can have. You can have that type of influence over somebody and never know it.
Yeah, well, it goes back to interconnectivity, and that's why Z Damon did so well.
Yeah.
It was the power of like having your own like little social circle. Like I have no idea where a lot of the names I first encountered ended up going. I do remember some old names from the Doom connector early Z Damon era that I ran into, but as far as like that kind of power to really bring people together and kind of keep each other hooked, right? Because you're like, hey, I want to see you in a server tomorrow, and that's a familiar face, familiar Doom guy color. But I mean, as far as the development of a player, I mean, this is a topic I could go on for hours at a time. The step up to having another method of moving and aiming in a game like Doom on a even on like a semi-competitive level, getting beat like that and then finding like, oh, I can move my mouse now. Like what kind of doors does this open for me? It's crazy. And if you have that competitive fire lit under your ass, like a lot of us did, because we're very feisty young people, we it began to it began there it was rumblings of what would eventually become a very high octane competitive environment.
Yeah. Although I think that was probably destined to happen anyway. And that's all to do with what you had said with the interconnectivity. And that's just because, and I don't know if other ports had done this yet, but if they did, it probably wasn't as refined. But Zdaemon said, no, we're going to take a chat program and build it into the launcher that is an installer. So, it takes all of the, because, prior to ports and everything, source ports like that, like you kind of had to know how to get around a computer. It required you to be a little bit more savvy prior to some of those things. But Zdaemon basically made it possible for people that might have an interest in gaming, but maybe they don't have the patience to get through dealing with a PC. You know what I mean? Like you could turn on an Xbox or a Nintendo or a 64 at the time and be very good at games because you've got, a sharp mind for that, quick reflexes, you're into it, you love it, you enjoy it, you're a fast learner, but you just don't have the patience to pick up the intricacies of a PC. Well, Zdaemon took that away. Like, you just, you write a name, you create an account, you log in, you have a chat to, link with people. And like you said, like those things kind of stacked up on top of each other. And it just so happened to be at the right time where then all of these young, edgy teenagers came around and, were hormonal and imbalanced and out of control. And now we're arguing with like the old people before and starting to shit with them. And well, the rest is history.
Well, it was fantastic. I mean, like you said, you had a streamlined experience now. And Z Damon deserves all the credit in the world for that, because it was probably one of the most streamlined experiences in Doom history. With how, I mean, what'd you have? You had a dialog box that popped up with that familiar logo, and you had a username and password field. There was no other option other than create an account. So even people who weren't like me and you, like, I mean, I grew up with, tinkering with computers, like playing games on like a billion demo CDs. You remember demo CDs? I used to play those things all the time. So just by the nature of us doing that, going into DOS, doing command line garbage, all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Well, we were also part of the crew that, you downloaded patches manually. You didn't have Steam. You had to apply patches and mods like very manually. So you had to know your way around file structures and config files and what have you. I mean, it's a little bit off base with how Z Damon did it, but it's still relevant, because if Z Damon came out with a patch, you installed the new application, and well, there you are.
Yeah, I did it for you. It took everything that was hard away. Not hard, but if you weren't into that sort of thing, yeah. And there were a lot of people, and they were smart enough to build around the experience system. They understood that while the competitive community is where the top players will thrive, the reality is the vast majority of players will not be competitive and will not be that good. So you have to pick like what's the aim of your product? Is your aim longevity and in a large community? Because if so, you probably cater to some of the more less involved game modes in terms of needing for practice to master them at the time, such as dueling or team deathmatch, and later go on to be capture the flag. No, well, let's just, I mean, you remember shit like the nutty free for all wads and co-op build M or oh my god maps,
Right. And to those who don't know all these, what is Jamie, what is Hatred talking about? Well, those are old projects that came up for their respective game modes. Now, Z-Daemon debuted and had, free for all. It had duel, which was basically two-person free for all. I believe it shipped with capture the flag, but it wasn't huge at the time, apart from like a pub game that might start up and have,
And they use the
8v8
keys.
on what was it? Like I remember that canyon map in ZDCTFMP, and I remember like insane games going on there. But apart from that, there wasn't a competitive capture flag movement yet. You can almost trace two distinct schools of thought with any sort of competitive community. You have the casual slash convenience slash fun group, which, if you ever looked at the Z-Daemon XP leaderboards and saw Bazooka's name at the top, like that was who you were. Just some free for all rocket spamming crazy person just in there to just go at it and just have fun. And then the other school of thought is a hardcore slash structured slash very, very finesse based group of people. And they are always going to be your minority, but they are not mutually exclusive. And
No, not at
Z-Daemon
all.
did capitalize on that just by nature of DooM being the way it is. It was fun in both duel and deathmatch. And you had many years of the old Dwango service compilations available to people. You weren't playing on only Doom 2 maps at the time. You were playing on compilation maps. You had, I believe, Green War was out at the time. There were legitimate deathmatch maps, and there were some maps that end up working very well for duel. And players caught on to that, and there were servers up just for those maps.
And some of it too is like a perfect storm with capture the flag, which initially wasn't so streamlined and it needed some modifications and it got better. And that, and just the fact that Doom is the history of Doom, rather, is just built on modifications, whether it's to the code itself or to just something as simple as a patch wad. There was so much variety that community overall preference started to take fold in about the mid 2000s. The game shifted away from being dual centric in the early 2000s and late 90s to, capture the flag. And that's where I think the community really exploded, because no matter how well a league was run or a tournament series was run, in dueling, you just always have a problem of attrition. It's people get into it, they think they're going to compete, and then they just disappear, because in dueling, if you lose, there's no excuse. Like,
It's very brutal.
Yeah.
It's unforgiving. And before we get into capture flag and the formation of it, I want to touch on there were dual tournaments in Z-Daemon. There were amateur ones, and there were like rookie ones and open ones. I can't remember the exact terms they were called, but
one was open. What was
the
open? What was that? I think open was like this is the high tier one.
Right. You couldn't sign up again for the amateur one if you had won it.
Yeah.
Then at that point you were playing in open, and it was very manageable back then because there weren't that many names to keep track of. So that was the more organized competitions that were available at the time, like in the early 2000s. What ended up happening was, as capture flag got more refined in Z-Daemon, which, definitely, I mean, Doom is very easily moddable even from a programming standpoint. There's only so much things you can do, many things you can do with this engine. You can achieve some amazing things with the engine, as we saw in other ports down the line. But back to Z-Daemon, when they put in capture flag, and then as people were coalescing around these dual events, these dual servers, people started to take sides, and then clans were happening, like more like serious clans.
Oh yeah, no, this shit was brutal.
It was legit. It was like it was Monday Night Raw class feuds happening in dual servers. And then as players began to play each other, well, then it spilled over into capture the flag, because what is more appealing to a group, a coalition of players, a clan, than to take another clan to task and beat their ass in a capture the flag map? There was no replacement for that. And that is where capture the flag really took off.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I want to say it was even, yeah, like it was probably a thing before I even started getting really into capture the flag. At the time, I wasn't really part of any major clan. I was in like one or two of these smaller tier clans. Like I wasn't very good then. And I was much more focused on learning how to aim with my latency at the time, and learning how to play, learning how to move and position. And I ended up sticking to just sheer aggression and refining my play that way. It wasn't until later when I started to pick up on these groups that were playing capture the flag. They would join the server in a pub game and all mob one team. It could have been a tag that said DUI. It could have been a tag that said UD. It could have been a tag that said RFA. But no matter what, you almost had a guarantee of these players coming up, joining a server and saying, we are here and we own this server now.
Yeah.
So there was an there's an appeal to that. Either you wanted to be a part of this group or you wanted to smash them and make a name for yourself. And that natural vibe really lended itself to the natural growth of the competitive community as a whole. And that happened in parallel with a lot of other games at the time as well. But with Doom, it was so easy to join a server. You didn't have to wait in queue or nothing. You powered your way in, like, hey, guess what? Come at us.
It's funny because it's like our history is like built on toxicity, if you think about it. It's not just toxicity, but in a lot of ways, conflict is what pushed ultimately us away from the clan scene and more into a league system. And I've talked with this about people before, but you kind of have like two schools of thoughts, right? Like you have people who kind of romanticize what the clan days were like. And then you have another group of people that are like, no, it was terrible. I tend to be with that line of thinking. I think the clans were fun. I certainly think they had their charm, but a lot of clan wars, which at the time was like the only true competitive venue for team games, a lot of clan wars oftentimes just didn't happen because one side would be ducking the other because they weren't getting what they wanted in terms or agreements, and the leagues just said, no, we're getting rid of that. We all play on the same field.
Right.
So,
and
it just changes, right? No, well, no, it's I've talked about it before. It's just kind of it was the progression of, I suppose, the times, if you will. I mean, it's almost like in a funny way, not to be funny, but also not to be cringy. It was like the first real esports.
I mean, it really is the natural evolution of what ended up happening. I mean, okay, what's your first step, right? You have this engine that lets you do client server stuff. Okay, cool. Now we got dual servers. All right. Now people are getting good at that. So it's a step-by-step process, and you can kind of hash it out along a long timeline. But when clans came onto the scene and people were having wars and, ducking each other, yeah, of course. I mean, R and UD and DUI and RFA, everyone was doing that. TC, Sin, tons of clans were all like in the same melting pot, like going at each other's throats in public, like on the forums or on IRC at the time, or even to each other in the servers. But that aspect of competition was there, and there was something that had to happen naturally for it to push forward. What was the next step? Well, in 2006, the International DooM League started, and this was a way not necessarily for clans to act out against each other, but for players in general, because it was very clear that we all loved capture the flag.
Yep.
I mean, before this, we had events like USA versus Europe. And that, I mean, that's self-explanatory. The best players from America, best players from Europe would go head to head in a series of maps. That was always a spectacle to watch.
Or just, yeah, I mean, they could just be the best players, period, right?
Well, and that's usually what ended up happening. Maps, servers notwithstanding, there would be games that would happen on American soil, and then we'd go over to Europe. But that was happening before the IDL happened. So that was your first interaction with an organized game across clan lines, because these people were all in the same servers anyways. So what ended up happening is, hey, we're going to start a league, and there will be a structure to it. You get to pick your players, and you're locked in. And that is what you had to work with. And the title is yours if you can make it to the playoffs. And from that, I mean, that was Xenaero. I believe that was after the launch of Xenaero 1.08, which had some problems with it initially.
There was a patch.
There's a lot of history around this time frame between what happened with 1.06, which ended up. No, it was 1.07 in I want to say 2005, 2004, maybe
4 or 5. 4 or 5, because
yeah,
it was 8, and it was it's like the mythical 0.8, which lasted till
0.8 was
2012 when 0.9 came out.
0.8 was when the IDL happened. I know that for sure.
No, it was 0.8. It was like 0.803, I want to say. There were a couple of big patches for 0.8 because there was that. I remember there being some desyncing issues. Gosh, I can't. I just know one of them was put out right away and one of them wasn't, and then one down the line came out.
Well, yeah, I don't want to comment on that because I don't remember all that.
Oh, I don't
down to the letter. You'd have to ask one of the Z-Damon boys about that one. But what ended up happening is the league took off, and it was widely successful. Tons of players were coming to play and fight to win. Like it was vicious sometimes. I mean, in the IDL IRC channel, it was a wild time. It was awesome. And I mean, Z-Damon kind of had this on lock because the only other multiplayer port at the time was Skulltag, and there was no organized competition on Skulltag. Skulltag ended up becoming more of a modder port for, its mission was not as hardcore as Z-Damon, I want to say. With Z-Damon, you had this very focused group of individuals that wanted to really push Doom Capture the Flag as hard as they could. And we ended up having maps made for it, a compilation map pack for it, and refining rules and structure over time. I mean, it was very widely successful. And there's something to be said about how Doom ended up progressing from, point A only a couple of years ago to 2006 when the first International Doom League season happened.
That, I think, is explained by a variety of things.
Well, okay, we could get into all the different political reasons, but I don't really think that's prudent.
No.
What ended up happening, the short version of all this is that the International Doom League was trying to play a stable version of the port at the time. And there was friction from members of the administration of Z-Damon and the administration of the IDL. And long story short, we couldn't play on public servers anymore. And that was pretty much the end of the coalition on between the port officially and the IDL, which was a bastion of competitive play at the time. And that ended up lasting for, I don't, how long was the IDL even on Z-Damon? It was on until it ended in
07 to 2012, and then it had a few, I think 3 more seasons on Odom. 3 seasons on Otomex, and 1 season of Otomex demos we don't have, and we don't have the first and maybe second season to
Before it
IDL
happened,
demos.
yeah, but before it went to Otomex, it went to
Xandronum.
Xandronum, which was the inheritor of
No,
Stoltag.
no, no, no. It did have 3 versions of IDL on Otomex because if you remember, they moved.
Oh, there was a switch. You're right. I'm
Yeah,
misremembering.
they IDL Winter 2012 was the last season on Z Damon, and I remember because that's the season I won. And they went to Otomex, and Otomex. I remember there being some flaming, but it was kind of tempered. Everybody kind of knew when the 2012 Winter IDL season was ending. It wasn't officially announced, but word travels. We're a small community. And it had gotten out that Otomex was going to be taking over the IDL, and for valid reasons, very valid reasons.
To give context to this, okay, so
Um,
we kind of skipped over a lot here. So Otomex it was a passion project at the time for. Okay, before I say this, I want to say that because of the falling out with the IDL and EC Damon administration, we hit a wall. We could not get. We were not able to get server binaries.
try a fucking another planet is what was hit.
It was a very rough time to like proceed because we were having games where people were crashing like mid match. If not players crashing, the server was crashing. It was horrible. And it was a very contentious time, unfortunately. So what ended up happening is because the DooM source was open, we inherited, I say we collectively, I don't program past ACS. And that's actually another fun little topic. But a passion project of Otomex came out.
Yep.
Inheriting from the same base version of ZDoom, I believe Z Damon also inherited from ZDoom 1.22. I'm pretty sure they
06, right?
Hmm?
I want to say the first release of Otomex was 06.
You know what? I actually have no idea when the first releases came out.
I mean, it wasn't anything special, obviously, but I want to say that.
Oh, it's a prototype version. Yeah.
Yeah.
It might have been as early as that. I don't happen to remember because when 06 was going on, I was very focused on playing Z Damon. And at the time I still had dial up. I was trying to understand how the lag compensation worked in 1.07. It was extremely tough for players with higher ping, and ended up how I ended up teaching myself how a lot of netcode and lag compensation worked, and understood net play as a concept and structure a lot better, which was a fun process for me. I was always very curious about how ports worked. I could read the programming of it, but ZDaemon was not open source. So when they added the lag compensation code, what ended up happening was if you had a higher latency, the client was projecting the visual player sprite ahead. It was trying to calculate it ahead of where the actual physical game object was. So you had to aim behind the sprite. And I was always curious how that worked. And I never figured out why that implementation happened the way it did.
I can't even speculate because that gets into an area that I'm not even familiar with.
Oh yeah, I really enjoyed trying to master. It was frustrating for sure because it added another aspect to refining my own gameplay with, okay, now I have to mentally keep track of where this player was a fraction of a second before where the sprite was. But barring that, I still enjoyed playing in the IDL early on until I joined the rest of the modern world and got broadband. And when I got DSL, it was like the weighted cloak came off, dude. I became an absolute monster. If we had stacks from back then, you would see a gigantic spike in my defensive capability. It would be really cool if I had that data in front of me.
Yeah. Well, that was like again, there were a lot of us too, especially like some of the old, and some of them weren't even necessarily old school, but they were affiliated with the old school guys that had been around and had been great duelists, but they weren't, for example, CTF players. So,
Well, okay, to be fair,
I mean, they had the
CTF.
ability to get there. They just weren't initially, I guess, is the way to put it.
Well, it's tough too to transition from only duel to capture flag
Oh, for
because
sure.
then we didn't have team speak, or well, we did, but no one was really using it for voice communications early on. So we were using binds, we were using text binds. You like press the G key on my keyboard would like alert that would say, hey, there's somebody in the base. So I remember having like 10 different text binds to communicate various things like, hey, base is clear, incoming, base not safe. I'm covering you because I was primarily a defensive frag house. So I didn't have a lot of binds for the rare times I had to run a flag.
Hmm.
And that was the downside of the bind system. But communication was hard then. And the reason I point this out is because in duel, you only have to keep track of one other person. In capture the flag, you have to be able to keep a mental picture of everything that's going on with ideally 5 other people and 2 points of interest, which were the flags. And I ended up being able to look at the obituaries and time people from point A to point B, from base to base, to keep a mental picture of the map. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine that is easy for a lot of players who only play duel until then. You have to be pretty motivated, and you have to be able to say, look, I got to expand my skill set. And even to this day, like, it's very valuable. I mean, I've played games in tonight where I didn't have any voice communication with anybody, but I was still able to keep a very active mental picture of the map and figure out what was going on with just by looking at the obituaries. So there's something to be said for being able to look at only the game state and focus on that. And that's not easy. I'm not trying to brag, but it really is not easy for a lot of players to transition from a dual mindset to CTF. And we'll lose players along the way, but the players that did make the jump grew tremendously.
Yeah. It's so let's move on because we've kind of talked about this era a lot.
Yeah.
I want to get to where, because you were a captain, you were a player in the IDL, you played in the WDL.
I captained rarely. I wasn't.
Well, you were my captain one. I mean, you traded for me, but
Yeah, that was a rare occurrence. I did not captain very much.
you were definitely a player a lot.
I was a player pretty much every season as far as I can remember. I don't think I skipped a season in the IDL until way later on, when I ended up partially running it when Ralphus had stepped down for, he's DooM players are very overbearing. Everybody needs a break. We're a very vicious crowd sometimes.
Well, how he's done it for so long is a miracle in and of itself. Dude,
Yeah,
I had to
I mean,
disappear for 10 years, dude. Like, let's put it that way.
yeah, and Ralph had to run this league for like a long time. He didn't have to, but he wanted to, and that takes a special person. I'm not trying to blow smoke up his ass,
No,
but
me neither.
that is very that dude with how volatile we were some years. It's a marvel that he didn't hit the red button and just eject us all into space, man.
Oh, and the worst is like by far gone. Like it.
Oh,
The
for
worst
sure.
of the worst we have now is like a dot on the sun compared to what was taking place, you know,
Oh, we were
10,
ruthless to each
11,
other.
12 years ago. Because at that time, even though the clan model was kind of dated, there were still not necessarily clan affiliations, but like there was cliques, like all these different little cliques.
Right.
And that bled its way into the league, and it absolutely bled its way into policy because some of those people would get involved either on the board or they just knew the right person to talk to have influence. So it was almost just like espionage through
It was a
and
miniature
by any means
Congress.
ever. Yeah, like it was just complete and total fuckery.
Well, what happened after Ralph stepped down? I don't think he had a board on his own. I think he brought in Ladna and maybe No Star at the time because No Star was running servers. But oh, all right, so to put it in perspective for people who don't know this era or are listening and curious about Doom multiplayer in general, the International Doom League was run primarily by Ralphus with help from other people. And those people ended up comprising of the board and generally the inner circle of the International Doom League. Now, when Ralphus stepped down, Human Bones ended up stepping up and built a board of people, of which I was one. And it was a group of people. It was like six of us, I want to say. I can think of six different names. And it ended up becoming a miniature deadlocked Congress all the time. So it was not a healthy environment for pretty much anyone. I mean, it nearly poisoned the well of capture the flag competition permanently. It was very close to that point. But I mean, we pulled out of it, fortunately.
Yeah. Well, I think I kind of look at it like maybe it's a glass half full sort of analogy, but I look at it like we kind of weeded out the bad apples in that time. And there are still, don't get me wrong, like there's some pretty bad actors that exist in our communities, but it's it's kind of tapered off, I think. And even
Well,
if they I mean, the bad community still exists, but they're so isolated from everything else that I feel like they don't even matter for the most part.
right. And to everybody's credit, I mean, as we got older, as we did this more, we learned that it was universally the best case if they weeded themselves out. We didn't actively do a ton of policing. It ended up the community in general ended up shunning the bad apples out, and the quality of the league did grow as a result. There was a bit of a schism for a little bit late in the IDL's life, which ended up which I think it I'll say I think it did directly end up leading to the league's termination until the World Doom League, its successor league, ended up starting up. But until that point, um, competition shifted around. After the
Yeah.
International Doom League dropped, players really didn't have another option. So all of a sudden, the Skull Tag successor, Xandronum, looked a lot more appealing at the time.
It's not only that, but like we were also still a private community. Even when we moved to Odomex and Zandronum, I mean, we may as well. I mean, our whole legacy was private. There were, I know when we went to Zandronum and I came back, and that was in 14 or 15. I don't remember which year. There were players who had never they heard of CTF leagues, but they didn't know who like most of us were. They're like, who are these people? And it's like, well, I mean, we've kind of been in like our own little box for the last however long.
Yeah,
So
it was very word of mouth. I mean, if you didn't know somebody who was involved in the league, you really didn't know about it. And
no,
also, there was a side effect too. Multiplayer and single player in Doom. For those who don't know Doom, they're they're effectively entirely separate. Only in recent years have they become a lot more intersected. But then it was a complete. It might as well have been a completely different game. Multiplayer and
oh
single
fuck yeah,
player were completely different arenas, so you didn't even have that to through osmosis try to gain players from single player like speedrunners or what have you try to come over to capture the flag as they have in recent years. It was very, yeah, it was very boxed in, very private, and that was partly in due to how we operated in the Z Daemon client. There was no other option. If you didn't have the information for the servers, you didn't know we existed. You weren't able to find it and be like, hey, what is the International Doom League? What is this? What's this website?
yeah,
You had no way of finding us.
and that and I think that's why we had like it wasn't just because it was forced because of the refusal to hand over server binaries so that we could continue playing. It sooner or later, like we just wouldn't have been able to get new players. And I think that
Well, there was a lot of politics too at the time, is why the IDL ended up
for sure
eventually going down.
Well, and I think the model of the IDL wasn't sustainable either. Not even just the private community, but the long seasons, the 8 to 10 week seasons and the commitments that it just took. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, this is something to talk about. Yeah, for sure. Because, okay, so anyone who's been watching my broadcast of the last year's international World Doom League, yeah, we only had 5 weeks of the regular season. In the International Doom League early on, dude, we had. I talked to Ralph the other day about this. I don't remember the number.
There was a 12-week season.
There was was it 12 week? Oh my god,
11 or 12. It was 11 or 12.
We played for effectively 3 months in just the regular season, non-stop. I don't know how we did. We did
it twice a year.
We did it twice a year.
We
had one season in the summer and one in the winter. It was insane. But it was also, to be fair, our only focus. Some of us had school or jobs.
Yeah, but we were young.
But in terms of the internet and other games, like now you have game saturation like you wouldn't believe. But so we could focus on that for pretty much all of our free time. And it was a passion. There's nothing wrong with that. We were getting good at it. Players were still somehow getting better all the time. It was remarkable.
Well, I think game saturation is a great point to bring up because it's not really ever discussed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, even back in the late 2000s, there weren't a lot of super popular games that are out, kind of like there are now, right? Like there's a new hot trendy game out about every month. Whereas back then, even that was not super common. But I still say, and of course I'm biased, I have yet to replicate just the overall positive and competitive and, how can I put it, fulfilling experience that I get from Doom CTF in any other game. I think for me, League of Legends at its prime came close, but other than that, like just the competitive nature of CTF and 3v3 CTF in those leagues was unreal. And there were real rivalries. There were real...
There's storylines, dude. There was... Yeah. It might as well have been a pixelated WWF.
Oh, well, look at us, man. Purposes. Like, we got on... like, so... I get drafted by arguably one of the worst captains ever in any of the leagues. And he builds one of the worst possible teams. It is, to the best of my knowledge, one of only 2 teams. And I think Snacks, which was a notoriously bad IDL team, I think they won rounds. They just never won a game. But DMR never won a round. They went completely winless. And at the time, my wife was pregnant with our second child, and she was due right around the end of that season. And I had come back from already being off a year. It was my first like real IDL season that I stayed through. Dude, I asked to be traded. And yeah, like, most of it was because I thought like this was going to be my last season. I wanted a chance to compete for a championship. But there was a part of me that was like, fuck, I can't get off this train wreck fast enough. And I would have played it out. But then we get onto your team, and then we've got 3 at the time very volatile personalities on the same team.
Oh yeah.
Well, include Do, and you could say 4 because Do is our 4th. So it was me,
true.
White Boy, and Do. And like every week it was something like we're arguing, we're at each other's throats, and we made it all the way to the Master Bowl. And it's actually pretty extraordinary that we got that far, all things considered, because we didn't use comms at all.
We used Binds. I do remember communicating with Binds
We used
with
binds, but
yeah.
we got fucking steamrolled by a team that used comms very well.
That's true. The team of Genova, Italian Stallion, and Sabretooth was up. I mean, geez, you take the context of the time period out of the equation, that team still looks phenomenal. So it
Yeah.
really was two Titans in that map. But as a captain of that team at the time in summer 2010, season 8, the rebellion was not was not kind to me. So for those for those who have no idea what I'm talking about, I hate you so much. So what ended up happening is we practiced on this the map is extremely narrow. It was a CTF 03, a map 03 in that map pack.
Just choke points all the way through.
It was choke points like you wouldn't. It was one long choke point is really all it was. And to get flags out of the enemy base, you had to be fairly coordinated because odds were never in your favor trying to get out of that massive choke point. We had practiced the lineup. Come game time, somewhere in the middle of round 1, we're bleeding flags, and I'm like, what is going on? I see a player who is supposed to be defending now running, and we never recovered. And I learned later that Hatred and White Boy came up with their own plan, and I had no idea. And I don't think I have ever been more mad at a video game than that. We might have still lost, but the fact that we didn't even have a chance made my blood absolutely boil. I could not. And that was a time when I was like, I am never captaining again. We had no right to lose in the way we did. But again, at the same time, we were all very volatile, very eager for victory type people. And it was not a healthy team environment.
No.
But it's definitely one of my more sore losses in my competitive history.
That's probably for me the second hardest loss I've ever taken. I remember not, and I could give more context to this. So we practiced initially. The plan was I was going to defend. You were going to kind of float around, but it was effectively going to be you and White Boy were just attacking the whole time. And we did not practice that map well at all.
We were not suited for that map. We were much more suited for a more open map.
We didn't practice the prior week's map well either. And we stomped.
We crushed them.
Yeah. We did. And we were just like, what? So there was a part of us that definitely, despite the fact that practices weren't going well, we were still confident. But then I remember game day came up, and Mike Hale, who is a very good CTF player and an underrated CTF player in my mind, but an even better CTF mind, he was telling me the whole time, he's like, you guys need to run 2D. You cannot run 1D. You cannot run 1D. He just every day he'd say, you can't do 1D. And Do was convinced that we needed to do 2-0. So we did 2-0. And we were always arguing about like what we should be doing. We couldn't come up with the strategy at work because we tried 2D and it didn't work either. And the reality is we needed comms. Like that was the biggest problem. We just weren't on voice comms. But we get to game day, and one of the reasons why we were so confident too is because our opponents hadn't practiced at all until game day, and they grinded for like 6 hours straight that day. And I remember getting into the server, and they didn't give a shit that I was there watching their last match that they were warming up on. And they just like 5-0'd this like all-star team. It was like No Star, Mike, I think Ralph played a couple of games, and they were running everybody over. And I was just like, oh my God, like we're fucking next. And I just felt so unprepared because we didn't have a good strategy. And it wasn't anybody's fault that we didn't have a good strategy so much as it was just the situation and the team composition. But I remember watching Genova run the map, and I was just like, dude, I can't solo defend him on this map. There's no way. There's no fucking way. Because I'd have to be perfect. Because that's the type of map that if you solo defend it and you die once, you're getting scored on. And the first round, we got wiped out. It wasn't close.
Yeah, and then panic set in.
Yeah, and so then by like the midway, like I just abandoned it. I was like, this isn't gonna work. Like, so we were all over the place. The second round was really close, but we lost in a really. It was like 2-1, and we lost, and that was it. These were three round best of threes at the time.
Yeah. So for context, the playoffs and finals they were best of threes on one map. Now today teams pick home fields and it alternates in a best of five, which is, again, another improvement that we've made over the years after watching games like, this unfold. It's like, hey, it's the finals, really the playoffs. It should be like a long drawn out situation with teams having chances to rebound, come back from
for sure
things like this. And it's made for exciting games. And that game was pretty exciting. We had 6 players on the field that were phenomenal at the time. Like there were no bad players on the field. And it just ended up just not going our way.
Well, and I would still contend that on a different map we could have won.
It's possible, but
I don't know to be, and I still would have, looking back at it, like I still would have favored them. But I think on a map like Mount Zero, yeah, or Cold Sweats, yeah, I think we would have won on maps like that.
Well, and going back to like not having comms, well, that's a school of thought that has evolved calm play as well. Is that line of sight is like a major thing. Like you can play without comms on something like Mount Zero where you have line of sight to almost everything. On the map that we ended up getting smashed on,
yeah,
you had line of sight to absolutely nowhere, not even your own flag room from the outside room. It was impossible to really play without effective comms at the time. So, but that ended up naturally becoming a facet of a lot of teams later on. So, I mean, at the time, there were plenty of teams that were not on TeamSpeak that were communicating by binds and sheer game sense. So I'm not willing to point the finger at that exclusively. It was definitely a mixture of factors. Yeah.
Well, and I would also say too that even teams that were on comms, most of them probably weren't even using them right. I think BSK, that team with Saber, Stal, and Genova, was one of the first teams to do it right. And I later, in talking to them, I had learned that Saber's job was exclusively just to stay around in the mid area and report back what he's seeing. And
yeah, that's very smart.
And this let Stal know when to move up, when to stay in position. Now, of course, that would evolve because it turned out, as everybody knows, that everybody else can communicate too, and you can kind of all coordinate and move as a team. But again, this was 2010, and CTF at that point was still probably only 4 years going strong in terms of popularity. So, and not everybody had a mic. And even if you had a mic, as crazy as it sounds, I mean, there were people that could not run TeamSpeak and DooM at the same time. They didn't have the PCs for it.
This was the old e-machines era, man. It's like people still sometimes play on these potato computers, and that's fine and all, but at a certain point we ended up improving a lot as players. And I love talking about, I absolutely love talking about the mindset and the skill set of players that have improved over so long. And we have comms now. People are always like it, and even now people are refining those comms. Like I'm a huge proponent of like, I want as few syllables as possible. We can do it. Like and even in game, players got better with nuanced movement.
Yep.
Maps that were selected reflected this. Like the map we lost on, no one ever played again because it wasn't a good map. Players improved themselves so much that those maps became stale, and we needed more technical maps, and that has led to current compilations, which maps have trended away from very powerful defensive strongholds and runners like flag runners, offensive players. They got so much better at burning defensive players over the time. So on top of everything that happened in these games, the game state was constantly evolving.
Oh yeah,
and
for sure.
it's absolutely fascinating in a game that has the reputation of you can't even aim up and down in it. Well, you can in the source ports that we were running, but the very premise of the game is very simple.
Yeah.
And players were still finding, and still are to this day, finding ways to absolutely break that ceiling and soar even higher. It's fantastic to witness, and we saw that in those games. That team, Genova, Sabretooth, and Stallion, were a phenomenal team, and they deserve to win.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and I kind of resent the idea too because, looking back at it,
even though I hate my team, no big deal.
Well, no, I mean let's get perspective too. Nobody valued Stallion as a player at that point as a defender. But if you were in private CTF matches before that season started with him, or if you'd ever just opened your eyes and watched him play, Stallion was a naturally, like, this guy's a defender. But on most of the teams that he played prior to that, they were sticking him on O and mid and like, what the fuck?
Yeah, there were, well, and again, I mean, then players had one of three positions typically, and even sometimes only had two. You had defense that, guarded the flag, or offense that ran the enemy flag back to your base. And sometimes you, depending on the map, you would have a middle player, but those were very static positions, and people were still
it's
finding
not so
out
much now.
And even with newer players now, you have to figure out what they excel at and the support they need to excel in those roles. Like there's so much nuance in a 3v3 situation that you can put a player on offense. You could put, and I always respected Stallion as a fellow defensive player. Like I recognized him as a threat. Yeah. And there are some players who play defense very well and can't play offense. And Stallion is one of those. Now, can you expand him to like play like a support, a cover at mid, like a pickup player? Like absolutely. But there you have to find everybody's wheelhouse, and some people are stuck in their groove. There's some players who do all of it. Who knows?
Yeah, and that team in particular complemented itself very well. Like those players complemented every, like, Stallion was everything Genova needed. Genova was everything Stallion needed. Saber was everything both of them needed. They were everything Saber needed. Our team was just three really good fraggers put together. And at that point, I wasn't even really fully developed as a CTF player yet. I had still, I mean, again, and this is,
were any of us though? To be fair, like you're looking at it in context with the whole league.
It's true, but even 2 years better, I was night and day. I was taken as the second overall pick in that draft, and I shouldn't have been. And that was kind of like the whole thing about our team is like people are like, well, how could that team lose? They had the top, because you had the number one pick and you took White Boy, and you traded for me, and I was the number 2 overall pick. But it's like, okay, look at their fucking team. Their team is just as stacked. And yet that kind of just didn't exist. I mean, we were kind of, when I got traded, whenever you get a team that gets traded like that, they become the bad guy instantly. But I, at that point, still hadn't really found what my role in CTF was yet. So I didn't even know how to contribute to a winning team at that point. And White Boy, loved the guy to death, but getting him to focus and actually care for anything is a challenge in and of itself.
Oh boy.
And he was very good when he cared.
He's an
Very
extremely good player.
But a lot of times you could just tell, like, maybe that fire isn't there. Like maybe that drive or that competitive fervor just doesn't exist. He's just naturally good and doesn't care to really refine his skill that much. He'd rather just have a good time. That's why we could play survival with him and have just as much fun on, at the time, Skull Tag running survival, for 4 hours a night. And we'd have more fun doing that than playing private CTF matches. But when
we had so much fun with those survival maps, dude. There's so much fun.
And you look back at that, but there's teams like that all the time. And that was kind of the problem with the old system, is that it's entirely possible. And I haven't looked back at it, and I don't care to look back at it. But it's entirely possible that the only difference between a team was the predetermined Master Bowl map. If it's a different map, we have a different result. And if we're saying that, is that a good system?
Well, that's something we learned over time. I mean, to be fair, this was pretty primitive.
I'm speaking in hindsight. Yeah. To let me be clear. Like I'm not.
All right.
I'm not chastising the idea. We didn't know. The only thing we had at that time to really base off of was like the American sports franchise model. Esports weren't a thing. Like leagues weren't a thing yet. So we were kind of just going off of, Ralph's a big football and basketball fan and American sports fan. So Ralph took what systems he knew and applied it to a league. And there were a lot of problems with snake drafts. And I don't know, I guess nobody thought of the auction draft at the time, but even if we had the auction draft, it wouldn't solve the problem of the fact that the fucking league was 82 years long.
I mean, the length it definitely contributed towards burnout
and
over a long period of time.
Then the other problem with the IDL is you don't even have control over your product because it depends on a port that has absolutely no interest in supporting you. And you don't even have control over the servers because that's from another party. So everything is out of your control. You were completely outsourced. There were so many problems for the IDL that made it not sustainable. Well, the fact that it succeeded is like, it did. It worked, but I'm saying the fact that it succeeded is kind of a miracle in of itself when you look back at it. Because if one or two things changes, maybe the IDL just ceases to exist. I mean, think about that. Like, what the fuck? Like, we bashed our heads on the wall for 8 to 11 weeks at a time. And if you made the playoffs, if you got to the finals, you might have played for 14 or 15 weeks.
That's true. But like, I'm going back to this because I completely disagree with it being a miracle. I think it's 100% a testament to the passion of the player base.
Yeah. That's what I mean.
I don't want to say like, oh, this was a lucky roll of dice, dude. We had some very dedicated players, and even though we had tussles over the server hosting and whoever was running the servers at the time, be it one of like several different people, that passion was still there. At the end of the day, you might have disagreements or whatever, but they still ran the servers, and for the most part, like out of their own pocket. Like servers are not cheap.
No,
over a long period of time, over a whole international Doom League season, it was like, come on. Yeah. So, I mean, this was absolutely a passion project of people who loved playing the game, who loved to just who thrived on the competitive environment, toxic or not at the time. It was a force of nature on its own, and I think that really lended to a lot of really fun grudges, storylines. And a lot of fun seasons. I mean, I have a hard time looking back at a season I didn't really enjoy playing early on in leagues. That. It was
what? I had some terrible seasons.
Okay, we had some bad seasons, but it was we were still playing the game.
No,
and we still stuck it out. I don't remember anyone dropping out because they were not having fun. Usually it was like a personal problem where like their computer literally caught fire.
Or just bad teams. I mean, usually you would.
I don't remember teams splintering though.
Well, you would not necessarily entire teams, but you get players that would drop off and drop out of those teams. over the course of the season.
Yeah, and that's where the free agency came from. Now, free agency was a pool of players who had signed up but not got drafted to a team.
Yeah.
So that alone was a huge boon to a lot of captains who either misdrafted or got struck with unfortunate circumstance with a player like, hey, I'm trying to coordinate times for a match. I got one player in like West Belgium and another player in Alaska. How the hell do I make this work? I can't make it work.
Yeah.
And that's a natural occurrence of a worldwide league. We have people like DooM was, I mean,
it really was international. Like
it really was.
Yeah, that wasn't bullshit. Like
in the launcher, you were able to see flags next to players' names, like based on it would like locate you geographically. I remember seeing people from Saudi Arabia. I remember seeing flags that I had to look up because I'm like, where is this?
Yeah, who is this person?
It was phenomenal. Like there were players from Israel, there were players from all over Europe, there were some Russian players, there were players from Australia that were playing. It was Oceania. Like it was crazy. The amount of participation in and of itself deserves applause.
That's true.
These were people who were despite the pain, despite time zones, people were staying up in Europe till like fucking 5 o'clock in the morning on a work or school day,
or waking up at 5 o'clock, one or the other. It doesn't matter.
It's phenomenal, and that carried over to other ports too. Like Skulltag enjoyed its own brief competitive scene, and by extension, Xandronum as well. I mean, if I'm to talk about my Doom history in general, I mean, I played a lot of Skulltag and Xandronum, and there was definitely its own separate group over there as well. Granted, Skulltag was very successful for a good reason. There was no multiplayer port that extrapolated a variety of game modes and allowed for players to create their own. So game saturation wasn't a huge thing then.
No.
So the appeal of having all these different game modes out of the box was fantastic. And you had like custom built weapons and pickups built in. People were making maps to support these. It may not have had really widespread appeal, but you had a modern ZDoom experience in net play. And that on its own deserves like recognition.
Oh, I agree. I would love to have somebody on that would just talk about Skulltag. Like if I could find like Carnival and just like get him to sit down and do a podcast with me and just talk about Skull, because like he kind of gets, in my mind, like he gets kind of shafted, because I actually think like his intentions were very good, his focus was very good, maybe not a great programmer, but I don't think he necessarily did a bad job. And I
don't think he did. I think he does get a lot of bad rap looking back, like, with a more mature standpoint. And I'll be the first to say I was extremely antagonistic with Carnival. He did a great job with Skulltag, and it was I loved playing it. I was in Skulltag had those Blitz duel servers with like 5 frag limit, so there was an endless rotation of people, and that may have been the most fun I've ever had in duels, like just trying to stay king of the hill.
Well, that's what it would be. It's almost like it's more like King of the Hill, because it's like 5 frags in and you're done, and you're like, oh, okay,
and you're back to the queue, and you're like, I'm gonna get you next time, fuck you.
Yeah, dude.
And it was, and Karn did a good job with the port overall. Like I hate that he ended up kind of being almost chased out of the port, and that is partly due to the administration, which I ended up being a part of later on in Skulltag's life. I was very passionate of that port, to the degree where I had created game modes for it. I am the reason Invasion is in that port.
Right.
I created a concept version of it. I think I must have lifted it from something. I probably lifted it from like Unreal Tournament, I believe, at the time. But I've scripted like a little ACS thing, and I put it in there. And when Point 97 came out, the Invasion was in. It had official maps and stuff. I mean, I don't blame Karn for not crediting me in any way because I was such a piece of trash then, dude. I was very I was banned from Skull Tag like 3 different
Emotional.
times. I was a terrible child. Uh
Yeah,
and
we
then
live and learn.
later on I did probably the project I'm most known for over there was hide and seek.
Yeah.
That was really where I got involved in learning how the ports worked internally with ACS and coding and creating its own game mode experience. And I did that with Ross King approached me with that idea, and that was very successful
I have to
in
ask him
terms
about
of
that.
yeah, it was very successful in terms of reception. It went on for a while. It like dominated the servers for a little bit, and I've had thoughts about reviving it. The
Well, they still make maps for it.
the maps that we had towards the end of the project's life they weren't very well received by players. What ended up happening is we didn't have maps for a while and people were using other maps. Some of them were Doom 2 vanilla maps, like map 11 and map 29, and they were very fun. We we came up with the next version that like introduced a whole bunch of classes. I was able to design UI elements. It was probably the most sophisticated thing I've done with the project. And then unfortunately things came up and it ended up becoming a Chaos Core project and I was no longer part of the project, but I never saw another release.
Right.
So I mean, unfortunately that's yeah, I'm not going to get into that, but that's where hide and seek ended up dying. But if you've ever played that, that's a work that I was the coder and designer for that. Rusting had input with it, but like as far as development went, I did all the legwork, and then they added maps, but it never saw an additional release after that, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's definitely too bad. But I want to talk now in closing this out because I always do an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes, and again we've made that disappear like nothing.
I told you this is going to be there's so much to talk about in 20 years of playing.
Yeah. Well, and I also just want to have some focus of this be about what you're doing now, because I think you have effectively become the voice of at least the WDL. But I don't think it's unreasonable to expect that at some point you can't become like the broadcasting voice of Doom. I mean, right now, I think we'd probably put that title to Jahar, maybe even King Dime, as far as multiplayer Doom goes. And yet I think that your broadcast, your content creation, everything has just come so far along. I don't. We all know what you do now at this point. We're grateful for what you do and what you've given us, the contest or the content that you've given us. I guess my question for you is this where it ends? Like, are you? Because I always struggle with, should there ever be a point where I stop playing? Because I struggle with being a shell of myself. And last season in the WDL, I absolutely was. I feel a lot better this season. We'll see how it goes. But I feel I'm almost envious of you because it's like you found a second calling because you're very good at it and you produce your own stuff. So you don't need or depend on a lot of other people. You just put out what you put out. And I think maybe that's what I'm doing with podcasts for Doom, but like, what you do, I think is also really interesting. So where do you go with this? Like, how far does this go? And is this your next kind of journey in Doom?
Well, first of all, thank you like so much. Like I can't thank you and the rest of the community enough because like okay,
welcome.
So some backstory of this. I'm so glad everyone enjoys the streams and stuff. Like it's very unexpected, and I'll tell you why. I've always struggled with how I sound,
mm-hmm.
and it's apparent. I'm not I never was a very enunciative. Is that a term? Not a very clear talker, and that has it was partially a result of not of being homeschooled and kind of not having a ton of real life interaction. Plus, when I got my teeth corrected, it kind of reduced the frame of my mouth. So I ended up developing this lisp that pretty much everyone's heard it
Right.
over the years, and it's made me incredibly self conscious.
Right.
So for me to roll out of bed last year and say I'm going to stream this, forget it. I'm just going to throw it out there. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And that's, we've had almost 2 hours of history lesson, really. And if anyone is still listening to this at this point, this is where it all came together. All the work I did with mod projects on SkullTag, all the administration stuff that I worked with on SkullTag. So I got like experience working with people and driving a community, and all the gameplay experience I've had on Xenaero led me to be able to translate a game of DooM's pace with content that I'm used to creating, all the graphical content. I had to teach myself a lot of how video stuff worked, like on the spot.
Right.
I was starting to do, well, before I get into this, no, it all came together for that point. I had a relevant skill set over the years of just all the stuff I've done over the DooM hobby. And I was like, I can apply my knowledge to this. I can like make it look pretty presentable. And, no one's doing it. Like I have always been enamored.
It's very true. No one was doing it.
I have always been enamored and just awestruck by Jahar and the quality of content he does. I mean, he does this stuff for a living, mind you, but
he makes it look easy.
He makes it look
so effortless
and very, very fluid. More than anything else, I noticed how fluid his production was. And I was like, I've done graphic design for a while. I haven't done video stuff, but I know I can learn it.
And he's helpful too. Like he'll reach out and give you like advice and be like, I'll take you on. You can come and, do announcing with me. You can do all this stuff with me. So like, I definitely see you like have that kind of attitude too, where it's almost, maybe it's unintentional. Maybe it's just like a quirk of your personality where you're like, no, it's like a pay it forward sort of thing. But I definitely get that vibe from you too. And I think another guy that's been helpful with me with that is, well, two guys are Dime and The Keep that were helping me with the podcast. And it's similar to yours where it's just like, I want to do this. I'm a natural, like I don't have a lisp or anything like you do, but I struggle with how I just don't like the way I sound. I don't know. It's not the same thing. But I think in your case, like I almost think the lisp has become like an iconic thing. Like it's like, hey, it's Zen, but that's fucking cool. Like that's part of your, not shtick, but the production is so good. You're very clear when you speak in my mind. And I think that just adds like charm, character. You know what I mean? Like it's a good thing, not a bad thing. So when I see, because I've done casts with you and stuff like this, and obviously we're doing this podcast together right now, I get that same vibe from you that I got from Jahar in The Keep, guys that have helped me before. And I do. I think there's something about your personalities that you're very driven to learn these things, but you also want to see people do well too. So I wonder if that has something to do with it. I'm not sure, but I think you're doing good, and I don't think I understand why you would be self-conscious. I certainly can't tell people that they shouldn't be self-conscious about anything, but I don't think you should be. You don't need to be, because I think it's something that isn't a problem at all. You're very clear when you speak, and like I said, I think it brings a certain charm. Like don't cut your lip off to get rid of it.
You know I mean, I have to like shave off the sides of my tongue or something. Like it doesn't fit anymore. No, and I appreciate that, but it really ended up becoming kind of like a shatter through the ice type moment, because I started my Twitch account initially just to get through my insane game backlog over the years. I always buy games. I'm like, no, I'm going to play Doom instead. What am I thinking? So ironically, it was an effort for me to get through to force myself to stream games for friends and be like, hey, come watch me play this game and get my ass kicked because I have no idea what I'm doing. And that in a way kind of helped me get a little bit more acclimated to put myself out there. Um, so when I started doing streams, I had to realize the mindset of just go for it. You can't get caught
Yeah.
up in it. And if it works, it works. If not, then whatever. But I mean, and I hope people with really like those radio voices and stuff. I know they go through training and whatever, and like there's actually voice coaching and stuff. But I've worked on my own to refine it, and I'm proud of how far it's come. But that has always been at my core a very driving force to be like, I shouldn't put myself out there. But now that's changed. And after watching what Jahar has done for Quake, I was like, look, everybody starts somewhere, and I might not be able to match Jahar on quality, but I like doing a sportscast type stream, play by play, see how well I can do it in Doom. And I was able to keep up. When I did week 1 of the summer 2020 World Doom League season, I was like, after the first game, I sat back and I was like, this could work.
Yeah.
I know what to call when because of my game knowledge. I can create the visual assets pretty effectively because of all the graphic design and other mod stuff I've done. And I was starting to learn how Streamlabs worked. I've since progressed to OBS, so I've already grown in terms of technicality. I've learned video editing, and that has come out in terms of, the promo for this season. I'm working on stuff right now for the broadcasts that are coming up that I'm super excited about. So it's a lot like how players have improved over time. As you reach a certain level in graphic and video design, you're able to move on to the next step. You won't see it like 4 steps back. Like when I started doing it the first week, I was like, how can I possibly improve on this? Well, here we are now. I'm starting to learn how to script in maps to create the overlays and stuff. It's been like a fun journey. And even though I feel like I've put the bar very high, when players like Alpha were streaming games, I was very excited because it shouldn't be just one person. If you have the passion for it and you want to do it, just go for it, dude. Like I want people to get better at it. And
Right.
I've always been that way as a player. I mean, yeah, my personality has always been almost competitively toxic to a degree. But if people ask for help, if people like want to improve, I will be right there to try to help people figure it out. And everyone has their own wheelhouse. Jahar is amazing as a community pillar in Quake. He's like, everybody knows Jahar over there. Yeah. He does great events. He's doing like the whole organ grinder thing. So,
and that's
who knows?
Phenomenal, right? Like,
I mean, you might see me on a Doom event over there. Like, who knows in the future, right? Who knows where any of this stuff leads? And in the Keep, his wheelhouse is podcasting. That's what he does. So while I look to Jahar as kind of like almost an example of things I could do, in the Keep might do the same for you. And in an extension, a lot of new players coming in will look to players that are veterans in the community and learn from them. It's kind of like a natural cycle of a trade almost.
Yeah. It is. It is.
And coming back to, is this it for me? I don't know. I mean, as of now, I don't know if I'll play. I kind of want to, because I jump into private games to pick up games. I get picked, and I still got it. I know I do. I'm crushing it in there, and my stats even last season were still high despite unfavorable circumstance. And so I still compete. I can still perform. But is it something I have the drive to do? I mean, I've won before. That's fine. But it's not as much about winning for me at this point. It's what's next, right? I don't know if it's something I want to continue to grind on. It's fun. Doom is always going to be fun. But if someone were to ask me, hey, can you play for us this coming weekend, or are you going to stream a game? And I could not give you a straight answer on if I had to pick between the two.
Which one would be?
Yeah. So I don't want to put a captain in that position. I don't think I have the time to captain my own team anymore, considering
Sure.
the amount of
Yeah.
effort that goes into this kind of stuff. Uh, because especially when the playoffs come up, I do special things for like the finals and stuff, and that took that I would be like dead to the world for like a solid week. There's no way I could captain a team in the playoffs with while doing what I do. But I mean, I'm glad that I'm thankful that the experience in all the ports over my tenured history has come almost like to this point in a natural way for me to fire up Streamlabs one day and be like, I hit up Ralph. I'm like, hey, do you have a WDL logo backdrop? I think I asked him this like that morning. I'm like, what do you have that I can use like right now? And it ended up being a very spur of the moment type deal, very uncharacteristic for me to go out and be like, hey, now I'm broadcasting to the what we have in multiplayer Doom. And that has led to me doing events for I did take the crown qualifiers for QuakeCon, like a kind of like a third level stream. And I was doing stuff for the multiplayer Doom Federation, uh their Vengeance League. And I think I did a couple dual events as well with King Dime, who is also coming back to him. I met Dime. God, when did I run into Dime? I think with the QuakeCon Take the Crown event. And ever since then, I've kind of been in his circle, and I'm thankful for it because he does have a lot of experience with, working in front of crowds and what have you. I mean, can you imagine playing live in front of like 20,000 people on games done quick? That's
Right.
like when you're on a stage or a pedestal,
Oh,
or
that's just
like
a rush, dude.
it's a thrill. I got a taste of that competitively when I went to PAX West one year, and they had this stage set up with a couple of semi pros of Counter Strike, and they were picking people from the crowd. When you are in front of people, when you're actually in front of people in an environment like that, it is a completely different world. So
Oh, I bet.
in that sense, I very much respect Dime and what he does and how calm he remains doing it, because you do have to desensitize yourself, even if you
Oh,
don't
for
have your
sure.
webcam on doing a regular stream.
That's trial by fire too, right? Like over time, like you either sink or swim in that.
Well,
There's no, I don't think there's any gray area in that, right? Like you either
no.
can pull that off or you can't. Like, and you need to have the traits to do it.
And your first attempts are going to be like nerve-wracking. Like I remember taking my place at like one of the computers, and I was like, dude, I was for the first couple of rounds, I was like trembling. I was like, what is wrong with me? I can't imagine how it is when you do games done quick for like the first time, and like everyone's watching you like run. You got like 20,000 people watching.
Yeah.
So, and it's similar to the thrill of getting to the finals of a Doom League, and you want that win. So, no matter what your medium is, you have to adapt to that platform.
Yeah,
And
for
so Dime
sure.
has been instrumental in helping me adapt to that. He's very impressed with like the multiplayer takes, and that's like that means a lot to me.
Yeah.
So, is this it for me as a player? I wouldn't say so. I mean, I'm around. I play. I do well. I don't see any reason to stop playing, apart from time constraints. And
Right.
who knows what the future holds. I could still sign up as a player and just warn every captain like, hey, when it comes to games, I'm not making games the priority over streams, because people are I've almost started to become the go-to person for these events. And it's humbling in a way that people enjoy the stuff that happens, and that I'm able to deliver the content like that. So it's very fulfilling for me.
And that's what's important. Like at the end of the day, like you feel like this is a hobby, but this is something I still get satisfaction out of. And if that's where you're at, then that's all that matters. And I would say too, that my hope for this season when it comes to scheduling games, and I'm somebody as a player, I want games streamed as much as possible. So I hope that there's an effort in such a way, even if it might be a little bit more work for you, it gets your name out there, is that we do games in such a way that you can actually cast all of them. Now,
That is very tough.
that is because we're looking at potentially 12 teams, and that would mean that you'd be doing 6 games a week.
And that's not too much of a problem so much as there is time constraints. Now,
Right.
we talked about how international these leagues are. There are people all over the place. I had games in Vengeance that were starting at like 7 a.m. my time. And
Yeah.
you know, I'll be honest. When it comes to Xandrona based leagues, I'm like not as interested. But with this, I would have to schedule my free time around it. And I don't really mind that. It would be effort, yes, but I don't think it's feasible to expect games with a whole board full of people from around the world in like every time zone imaginable to be able to schedule them all in a row. Would that be awesome? I mean, it'll happen every once in a while.
Right. But the whole expectation.
Yeah, I mean, and I might miss a game or two in a regular season. That's fine. We have demos and stacks on the website, which is an enormous leap for a Doom League. Like
Yeah.
we have a way to give people stats we can speculate on, based on last week. How did this player perform? We have every stat you could think of.
Yep.
It's so cool. And it's a really great aspect to also broadcast that, make people excited. Hey, like if I perform, they're going to mention me. And be mentioned by co-casters too. Like I've had you on, I've had Blair on. Blair is pretty much my permanent co-caster because he does.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, who's your permanent? But you and Blair, I think, do best with each other.
We ended up having natural synergy. Like, here's a good history lesson here. We have done casting before, and I don't know how many people know this because I rarely think about it. In the 2008 2009 era, on Justin TV before Twitch was a thing.
Yeah, I remember Justin TV.
Blair had hosted the Red Nexus server cluster, and we were dipping our toes in casting games, mostly the Z Damon Dual League games. We didn't do IDL games, but we did do the Z Damon Dual League, and I don't remember how that came about. I want to say maybe J-Kist approached us and asked.
He did. I remember.
Okay.
I remember because I helped him set up season 1 and season 3. And I know I wasn't around for season 2 of ZDDL, but I know in season 1 he wanted to get games casted. But there wasn't, Justin TV was one method. We were looking at the time at potentially putting them on YouTube with casting. That was our initial goal. That's what him and I had talked about. But yeah, it would have, my guess is at that time, and nothing in ZDDL would have happened if it didn't go through Jacobs. Like, so even if he didn't speak with you
Correct.
directly, he would have known about it indirectly and he would have given approval for it.
Yeah. And I don't remember. It's been, I mean, it's actually funny. Like my mental thread was like, well, it was only 10 years ago, but I'm like, oh, it's 10 years ago. I don't remember the details of how actually, yeah, you're right. Oh my God. How long have I been doing this shit? No, but for real, that was our first interaction kind of together in a broadcasting format when I wasn't crashing Blair's servers. That was fun, hiding from Blair. And that's not something that came to mind when I asked Blair to co-cast with me in week 1 of last season. So it was very natural. And I mean, it was part that I was already in the UniDoom inner circle with Ralph, Blair, Bones, Rock King. Bless Rock King, by the way, for that phenomenal voice intro last season finals. I can't wait to tap him again. It's gonna be great. But no, and then Blair and me obviously have synergy because it worked before and it works now. if I were to pick a permanent one, it would be him, but he will probably be playing this season. So I'll be tapping players like you, Human Bones, Chain Dude, I don't know, maybe Rust King, because I've worked with all you guys before. Who knows? And if other people want to step up, like,
It's
I've
fun
worked
to
with
do it.
Denzoa too. Dude, the the it's one of the coolest things about the format to me. Like, I don't like casting alone because you don't have somebody to bounce stuff on and take a little bit of a breather and formulate your next thoughts or wait for something to happen. In
Yeah.
a choke point map, there is a strategy in casting to let color commentary kind of go because there's nothing happening play by play. And the two caster format works very well. It wasn't planned this way, but it ended up working out very well. I just had a hunch that having two people on is a great number. You have somebody to bounce stuff off between you two, and things don't get stale as they do with one, and it's not as chaotic with three and above.
Yep. All those things are true. And I would say too, it just makes it easier for you over a long series. Like, let's say, okay, maybe one day you do a 3-game series, not so bad. But let's say the next day you do 4 games, 3 series, they all go 3 rounds. Now you're talking about you've done this for 12 games straight. You're going to start running out of things to say if you're doing it all by yourself. I don't care how gifted you are, how good you are at this. Like, talking and thinking and talking and analyzing what you're seeing takes a lot of mental energy. And
For sure.
and yeah, like that's another reason. So I'm down to do games if I'm around. I mean, I won't lie to you. My focus this season is strictly on playing because it wasn't so much last season. But dude, I'm always down. My schedule's a little crazy, so I fit in what I can. But if I'm ever around and fuck it, it could happen. I say let's make it happen.
Right. And I completely take the viewpoint that this is a very community based thing. Yeah, I might be the driving force behind it, but everyone I pick is a veteran player who knows what to say, when to say it, and I can build the synergy with. Yeah, sure. The first couple games, we're probably going to talk over each other. I mean, me and Blair were talking over each other constantly. We're tripping
We
over each
didn't
other.
though. I don't think we did. I
I
think we
I
had
will
very
say
good
this about
synergy.
you. I will say this about you. Yeah, we were able to mesh very well. Um, and there are some people. It's part of a fresh dynamic. Like, this is not a skill set I expected to build from the outset.
But I've done this before though too. I did a lot of casting with Chahar. And like he went
I
over
remember
stuff with
this.
yeah, he went over stuff with me just and it wasn't we would talk about it beforehand and I'd be like, dude, like you're the commentator, like I'm following your lead. So I would just let him talk and like the moment where like I notice his cadence like kind of changes, I'm like, okay, he's giving me time. Go. What am I seeing? And sometimes like you do have to cut the guy off to be like, holy fuck, this just happened. I have to tell you guys about it now.
Right. Yeah, you see a play unfolding, and I've done that with people before. And I mean, that's
No
how
taking it personal. You just
sportscasting
got to
works
know the
too.
way it goes, right?
Like, if so, like an interception happens like right in front of you that no one was expecting, they're on it. They're like right on top of it.
Yeah.
And it's a good format to use a sportscast like setup. It works, and it ended up meshing well for me. What I appreciate is the insight from having a varied crew of co-commentators, and it's a fresh format to rotate through. Now, am I going to use the same people all season? Probably not. Like, I might have more Denzoa on, for example. Like, having a variety is also healthy for the community as well.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
you might have two legendary casters on Quake like Jahar and 40 Lines. Like, I always rep them because they have that personality and that vocabulary that works very well. It's awesome. But I want to actively try to seek out multiple people. And who knows, maybe they'll take up casting of their own. Maybe they'll develop like a whole bunch of, video and artwork to like go with it.
Yeah.
I think it's, and in this current era where like everybody's on Discord and it's more interconnected than ever before, where there are things happening in Romero's Discord that are linking to Odamex. There are things that are happening in the Multiplayer Doom Federation Multiplayer Doom Federation has gotten big, and we're going to be cross promoting with them. There are going to be people who show up on Twitch when I'm broadcasting an event, and they're like, they might be wandering through the Doom 2 category, but like, I had no idea people played this competitively.
Yeah.
So the exposure is great for the league. It's great for me, obviously. And it's great for Doom in general, like Doom multiplayer and Doom single player, even by extension,
for sure.
is going through a golden period. And it would be great to take advantage of that. Who knows what it'll lead? Am I going to be doing something bigger down the line? Who knows? I'm down for it. But for right now, broadcasting for the WDL and making new stuff and seeing people enjoy that is awesome. Love it.
And that's where I am. Like and you know, we're gonna close this out here, but like that's where I am with podcasting. Like it's like I don't fucking know. Like I don't know how far this goes. I don't know how big this gets, and I don't really, not to say I don't care, but like I wouldn't be devastated if I don't become Joe Rogan. You know what I mean? Like I'm not. I don't have expectations about this. Like this is just a hobby. I enjoy doing it. I like talking to people, especially about something that I share a passion in with Doom. And then, you know, we talk about other things. And I haven't had a political conversation with anybody yet, but I'm sure it's bound to happen. I haven't had a conversation about sports with anybody yet, but I'm sure it's bound to happen. And I'm not ruling any of those things out. But like you, it's kind of just like, you know what? This is a hobby. And I think as long as you do it in a healthy manner and it's controlled, go fucking give it 110%, dude, because we're not here forever. And
well, you got to have fun doing it, and that's
legacy matters too. And
legacy does matter.
What matters to us? I don't know. I feel like it does. For me,
I don't expect to get like a partner status on Twitch. If it happens, it happens.
No,
but I want it to be.
I just mean how I'm remembered as a player amongst my peers.
I gotcha.
Like the fact that I can have these conversations with people, I feel like adds to my legacy with my peers, because like this is going to be weird that I say this, but if I were to die tonight, some tragic, who knows, I don't want people to feel like it's awkward to kind of come up with some way to describe me. Like I want to feel like I've had impact on people's lives.
Okay.
Because I've given a lot to this game. I've given a lot of time and effort to this game. So I'd like to think that it matters. I don't have anything material to show for it. The only thing I have to show for are friendships, and that's okay with me. But I want to know that those friendships meant something, that I was able to impact people for the good. And I know that's a little selfish, but sue me, I'm human. And I want to know that the time that I'm putting into something matters and means something. And if one person feels like, yeah, man, like that podcast was like not even life-changing for me, like that made my day better, then fuck yeah, like this was worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's good to set a low bar of expectations. Like I think the number one mistake a content creator can make is comparing themselves to somebody who's already established in their niche.
Oh, like, I don't at all. Yeah.
Like I think Doom is niche, and I'm like, we're not going to become like, you know, huge based on Doom unless, you know, something lucky happens. But that's exactly why you have to approach it the way we approach it. It's for fun. It's to bring enjoyment to other people.
You gotta love it.
It's our passion. I mean, we've been around for 20 years doing this shit.
Yeah.
I mean, that's saying something. Like we've been around longer than most modern games have been like alive.
I'm doing this podcast at 2:38 in the morning my time.
Yeah.
Like I fucking love it. Like
Friday night, baby.
Oh, dude, I'm ready to fall asleep.
I mean, it's damn, I didn't know I was boring you that much. Holy shit.
I just fucking, dude,
I'm messing, yeah.
Totally different shift now, man. I'm not on the night shift anymore. Oh fuck, back in the day, this was nothing. But yeah, man. It's we'll go ahead and we'll stop it here for now. I told you, I'd tell you this, and I've said this to all my guests. I definitely do. I have a lot of people I want to interview, but when it comes time to start doing people again, I definitely want to have you on again because I think it's going to be interesting to see the next time I do have you on as a guest where you've gone. It's kind of like we're tracking your progress.
Right. Well, who knows, right? I mean, even if you looked at, okay, what is it? It's May. Look at it. Look at this time last year. I
It's
hadn't
true.
even
Night and day.
started streaming, period.
Yeah. Night and
Like
day.
it was
Night and day
well,
between the beginning of the season and the end.
yeah, there was a lot of improvement. I developed a skill set very rapidly. And I mean, even the finals was a complete, it was like a 180 from rolling out of bed and starting it with like some transparent images, you know. It was something. It was a spectacle. People loved it, and it was fantastic. It put Doom League on the map. I mean, even by extension, I want to say it had impact enough to where Odomex ended up being adopted by John Romero for his recent events. Like,
Yeah.
can you imagine? I mean, if you asked me a year ago, hey, do you know that you're not only going to be doing a streaming setup for all of the multiplayer Doom community to broadcast the World Doom League, get good at that, and also, interact with John Romero later on? Like, come on, dude.
That's the dream, right? Like that's
Who
that's
knows?
the dream, right? Like, yeah, like getting a letter from Carmack or something like that would be like, what the fuck?
I mean,
Not that I have that expectation, but still, like, it's like these are the people that made the game that we love. Like,
right. Oh, and a side point, when I dueled Romero, he was using only arrow keys. So don't feel bad if you're using arrow keys in 2021. John Romero, the OG,
and we've come full circle. We started with arrow keys and we're
we
ending
started
with
with the arrow keys and ending it with them.
And it's arrow
Classic.
keys. So, all right, man, that's gonna cut us off for now. Fucking awesome conversation. Thanks for coming on. Say what you got to say to everybody. Tell them fuck themselves, whatever it is you want to say.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, and congratulations on finally having your walk.
Oh yeah, dude, thank you.
That's awesome. And thank you to everybody out there for being supportive for the streams and what have you. Like, it's so much fun to do it. I'm so glad you guys are having fun. Love playing you in the servers. Love showing off all the content. Hey, who knows what we'll be for a year from now.
Yep, it's true. All right, y'all. Until then, big shout out to Xenaero. Really glad that I got to have a chance to talk with him today. The conversation was obviously kind of all over the place, but I was really, really happy to have the conversation with him about how he was dealing with his lisp as an example as a broadcaster, because that's something that's challenging. If you have one, you have one. And it's one of those things that it carries kind of this subtle and silent stigma where if somebody has it, it's like, yeah, you can't really do any of these things. And as somebody that's personally known Xenaero for a very long time, I can tell you that it has gotten a lot better, and it's something that I'm sure he deals with. And whether it's there or whether it's not there, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't take away the fact that he is constantly creating great content, and it just gets better and better every time he does it, in addition to all of the artwork, which he does for me, by the way. So shout out to Xenaero for that as well. Okay, that's it for this podcast. Now for my next podcast, I'm going to have on Ross King. And him and I have had a really interesting history with one another. We've had some falling outs, we've had some blow-ups, but we've come to terms. And I've talked with him a little bit about kind of the things that we're going to go over in this podcast, and he wasn't afraid to let me know right up front that he has no problem going into some personal things. And I suspect that this conversation will end up being very deep and very much focused around life outside of Doom, with the flavor of Doom on the inside. He's always an interesting guy to talk to, very deep. So thank you guys for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it.